So this is what we know. On the 31st of March, Dominic Cummings drove from London to Durham, some 260 miles, with his family to be near relatives after his wife developed coronavirus symptoms. He was, we're told, worried about who would care for his son if he also got sick. The government's advice on essential travel when he made that trip included the instructions: do not leave your home, the place you live, to stay at another home. Do not visit second homes, whether for isolation purposes or holidays, and remain at your primary residence to avoid putting additional pressure on communities and services at risk. This morning, the Sunday Mirror and the Observer report 2 sightings on the 12th and 19th of April of Dominic Cummings out and about in the northeast. The second of these would be after he'd returned to work in London. Number 10 describes the stories as inaccurate. I'm joined now by the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps. Grant Shapps, do the government's rules on lockdown apply to everyone?
Yes, rules apply to everyone, that's absolutely right. And I understand what you read out there as well. Looking at the guidance, and I brought it with me here, there's also a section that says if you're living with children, keep following this advice to the best of your ability. However, we are aware that not all these measures will be possible. And essentially the guidance or the approach that people will have been taking will have been, say, their situation, as I understand it, will have been they have a young child, a 4-year-old, the mum who's ill, the father who's worried about becoming ill, and they looked for the place they could be to get the support for the child.
We understand that. Just let me read to you again, however, the advice from the Department of Health. It says, if you or someone you love has, someone you live with has symptoms of coronavirus, do not leave your home for any reason. Does that advice still stand this morning?
Yes, look, it
does.
Absolutely right. Then, advice does stand.
So Dominic Cummings broke that advice.
Well, I think the guidance also makes clear that you have to put in place the structures around in order to be able to look after, in this case, a 4-year-old. And whilst it's true that Dominic Cummings is clearly someone very much in the public eye, and it's perfectly legitimate questions for people to ask and indeed to be answered. I think it's also the case that a 4-year-old needs to get support, and having that support around them, in this case, by being not with the parents, but in a property adjacent to the parents, with the support of a sister and I think a niece, meant that they could bring food to the house and so on and so forth.
So all this wiggle room was discussed in the press conference you were part of yesterday, and Jenny Harris, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, said the public health guidance is if you are symptomatic, you stay at home, take yourself out of society as quickly as you can with your family and stay there unless there is an extreme risk to life. Was there an extreme risk to life?
Yeah, I mean, I think she's also said before about parents coming to reasonable decisions in order to look after their children. So it's essentially the same sort of thing. Look, everyone has to make a decision in these situations, in the whole situation, and remain in the same place whilst the lockdown, the 14 days, the isolation's going on. I think that probably, as I understand it, the most important thing here is that Mr. Cummings and his family remained locked down. They didn't then, as I think some of these stories start to suggest, move around. I also understand, my understanding is it's not true that he came back. I think he came back on the 14th of April. It's not true that he then returned to Durham. I think there's been some sort of, I think, incorrect reporting on some
I'll come back to all of that. Can I ask you again, was there an extreme risk to life in this case?
Well, I think they would have felt that they needed to put some measures in place to make sure.
Risk to life.
Well, a 4-year-old can't feed themselves. A 4-year-old can't bathe themselves and change their clothes. So it's quite clear that they wanted to put some measures in place. Look,
at the time he had no symptoms, of course, when this happened.
I'm afraid. I mean, I'm Transport Secretary. You're probably pushing me beyond my area of expertise.
Well, except
and
you
knowledge.
Must have talked to him about this, I'm sure, before coming on a programme like this.
I haven't
you
spoken to him.
You haven't spoken to him about this.
I've communicated. I haven't spoken to him directly, and I certainly
not?
haven't got into that detail.
Why not?
I mean, because
this is a very serious crisis for your government. Surely you should have spoken to him.
Principally, I came on your programme to, as you know, to talk about transport matters and how we're going to rebuild Britain after what's been a horrendous period for us and for the whole world. So for those reasons, my expertise lies in transport. But I mean, I'm trying to answer your
expertise lies in transport. Can I ask you, did Dominic Cummings, with a 4-year-old child in the car stop at any point on that very long journey?
I'm afraid, I don't know the answer to
this is
whether
very
he
important.
Stopped along the way.
This is important because it lets us know whether you would infect other people, and it's extraordinary that you don't know this and that Number 10 hasn't told you something so simple.
Well, I think with respect, and I saw some of this footage yesterday, Dominic Cummings appeared to me to be very kind of concerned about, for example, the photographers outside not being 2 metres apart. So I know he will have,
doesn't really
I
answer the
assume
question,
he would have taken every possible measure to make sure that he was not infecting. Well, in fact, I don't think he had the virus at the time.
If he had stopped and he and his wife had got out of the car, he would have been an infection risk, would he not?
I'm afraid, I mean, you're pushing me on something. I have no answer for you because I don't know the answer to the question.
Well, the answer is yes.
Whether
clearly.
he stopped.
The answer is obviously.
But no, I'm not sure. I'm not sure it is because, for example, it would have been possible for somebody to, not get out the car and not do the things you described. But I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid.
Yesterday, you told the press conference this. You said that Dominic Cummings stayed put once he'd got up there. The decision was to go to that location, you said, and stay in that location. They didn't then move around from here. And yet, he was spotted on the 12th of April at Barnard Castle, 30 miles from his parents' home. So what you told the country yesterday was not true.
Well, first of all, I don't know about whether those reports are true or false. I certainly know that the second of the reports, I think for the 19th, is untrue because he didn't go back up, as I understand it, to Durham. We can come on to that separately, as I'm sure you're about to say. So I don't know about the first one. What I do know is, and I'm not sure you've got the right date for when he first went up there.
The 12th of April, he was spotted at Barnard Castle.
Sure, but the question would be, did he remain locked down for the 14 days isolation, or till he was
well, not if he was spotted at Barnard Castle on the 12th of April.
I'm not sure your date about when he went up was correct, because I think he left down the street. You did in your introduction. You said the 31st, I think, or something.
Well, I'm talking about the 12th of April, understanding, by which time he would still have been infected.
Not if he went up on the 27th, which was when he was last seen in Downing Street, I think. So my understanding of this is,
what you said was very, very straightforward yesterday. You said they didn't then move around from there. They stayed put. They did not stay put.
No, whilst they needed to be in isolation for 14 days, and if he went
up, clauses are appearing all over the place in this story, aren't they?
No, let's just be quite clear. If he went up on the 27th or 28th, and the Easter Sunday was the 12th, then that would be more than 14 days.
So you accept that he did move around once he was up in Durham?
I don't have. I'm afraid I've read what you've read in the papers.
You've just accepted that, so at least we can establish that he did move around. That's what you said.
Don't put the words into my mouth.
I think I heard you. Anyway.
No. Let me just clarify for you, because I don't want you to put words into my mouth, which I haven't said. I have read the newspaper report about Easter Sunday, which would be the 12th. I was merely correcting the fact that it seemed to me that he may have gone up to Durham earlier than you suggested in your introduction, and therefore would have been isolated for 2 weeks, for 14 days. But look, as I say, I'm not.
Did you or anyone in Number 10 ask Dominic Cummings whether he had left the house once he was up there?
My understanding is that he stayed there in the house for the 14 days until he would have been out of the sort of quarantine period. That's my understanding of the situation.
Are you absolutely sure that he was not back in Durham, seen walking in a bluebell wood on the 19th of April?
Yeah, again, my understanding is that he's been down in London since the 14th of April and has not returned to Durham since that time. So, I mean, as I say, look, there's been a lot of stuff in the papers, and we're throwing all these dates around. I know, but just because somebody, just because it comes as a surprise to you, but just because you see it in the newspaper doesn't mean that it is true.
No, I'm trying to establish what's true. Now, you say that he definitely didn't go back up to Durham. How do you know that?
Because the statement from Number 10 says that once he came down to London on the 14th, he's remained in London since, and the reports of him being back up in Durham since, I think you said it was on the 19th, are erroneous. That's how we know.
So we're talking about statements from number 10 at the moment. The Number 10 statement, which you again read out yourself yesterday, said that at no stage was Mr Cummings or his family spoken to by the police about this matter. Now, the Durham police have flatly denied that and put out a very clear statement yesterday evening saying they did speak to his father. Who should the public believe?
Okay, I think there's been some confusion about this because... okay, well, let's try and clear it up. For one thing, the father contacted the police, not the other way round. And secondly, it was about an unrelated matter, which I think quite rightly they don't want to go into, about security. So it's not the case that the police made contact without any reason to discuss this specific matter.
Why did number 10 therefore say, and why did you say, that the police had not spoken to Mr. Cummings or his family about this matter when they had?
No, they spoke to...
about this matter?
No,
I can read you the police statement if you like.
You can.
OK, they said, on the 31st of March, our officers were made aware that Dominic Cummings had travelled from London to Durham and was present at an address in the city. At the request of Mr. Cummings' father, an officer made contact the following morning by telephone. During that conversation, Mr. Cummings' father confirmed that his son had travelled with his family from London to the northeast and was self-isolating in part of that property. That is a conversation between the police and Mr. Cummings' family about the situation.
I think you haven't read out the end of that statement as well.
I've read all that I've got. I mean, yes, they did go and talk about security.
They did. That's it.
But
so there are two things, aren't there? One is that it was Mr. Cummings' father who contacted the police, not the other way around, and B, the discussion was for a discussion about a separate matter related to security, which is the key thing. Well,
but they also talked about this matter, and number 10 denied that.
No, I mean the point is that
number 10 statement was very clear. They said they didn't talk, and they did.
If you read the original newspaper allegation to which they were responding, as I understand things, the newspaper allegation was that the police had made contact in order to raise this subject. The police only in fact, it was the father who made contact, and secondly, it was to discuss a security issue, which you didn't mention at the end of that statement.
The father is a member of the family, obviously. Can I ask, after all of this, is there in effect a new Cummings clause, which is that if you're worried about a child, you can decide where you go and self-isolate, any part of the country, you can drive where you like, and the government is comfortable with that?
I don't think there's any been a specific thing which says you can only move a mile or anything like that. The key point's always been that people remained locked down, which is exactly, as I understand it, what happened in this case in order to isolate and get beyond coronavirus. But you're asking...
I'm sorry, let me read you your own government's guidance on this subject, given on the 22nd of March. It says, essential travel does not include visits to second homes or similar, whether and including for isolation purposes. People must remain in their primary residence. Mr. Cummings did not do that.
Although, as we've discussed, when he arrived there at the place where he was going to get support in a property adjacent to his parents, he didn't then move around. He remained there in a place where they thought they could bring best care to their child. And as the bit of the guidance that you didn't read out makes clear, it asks people to make every effort. It acknowledges, it says, keep following the advice to the best of your ability. However, we are aware that not all of these measures will be possible. The key thing is not to keep moving around. And some of these stories sort of try to suggest that there was backward. Yes, no, but this is the point. Some of these stories are trying to suggest that he went up, he came back, he went up. I mean, 3 times I've seen suggested. And again, my understanding is that's not the case. And can I just say, Andrew, I mean, I know that this is of deep fascination, and quite rightly, questions
have been asked.
Very important story. Very important. 2 statements have been put out to try to clarify and answer the questions. There are, I should say, as Transport Secretary, for the reasons I came on the programme in the first place, massive issues which will matter to people even more than where family spent time isolating during this, including how we build our way out of this crisis, which are going to, in the end, matter to people a huge amount, and really ought to be discussing, at least in part.
Surely what matters most is the authority of the government. You are telling people to make huge sacrifices up and down the country, day after day after day. People have not seen their loved ones after bereavements. People have made huge sacrifices. And now we learn senior government advisors do something different from what the government is telling them to do. And in a sense, you can keep Dominic Cummings or you can keep the policy intact, but you can't keep both.
No, I don't agree with that. I mean, you're right. Everyone has been making huge sacrifices. I'm desperate to see my parents, who I haven't seen for months, like many people watching this. The key thing is not to continue moving around, but we've never told people where they have to specifically locate themselves, other than you don't.
Their primary residence.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, he went to his family's
not
home,
his primary residence,
and stayed in an adjacent residence. And as we've argued this
primary residence.
We've argued this backwards and forwards 2 or 3 times. The guidance also states you should do the things which are practical to provide assistance, particularly where children are involved, and this was the practical solution for them. So no, I don't think it means, to answer your question directly, I don't think it means that that's it now, let's not bother following the guidance. It's very, very important that we do defeat this virus. And I think people have been extraordinary in their sacrifices to do so. I know everyone is feeling the strain of doing it, and we do need to carry on making sure that we keep the R rate below 1 and keep reducing the numbers. That's enormously important thing to do.
But from now on, there's always a bit of wriggle room.
No, sorry. I don't think it's changed anything. The important thing is to remain locked down, particularly if you have the symptoms. And obviously, the rules have slightly changed now because people can travel more than they could, and in particular for exercise and other things.
So the lesson now is for everyone in this country who could have done something like this but chose not to. They got it wrong.
No, look, I think that people have been magnificent about the way the country on the whole has followed this, and everyone will have had to make difficult, I completely accept what you're saying, difficult and complicated decisions about the way that they organise their life through this process. In this case, as I understand it, Mr. Cummings decided that the best way to provide that security for the child was to be in a location where the sister and the niece could drop food off on the doorstep, and that happened to be in that location.
Is he going to resign?
No.
All right, Grant Shapps for now. We will talk about transport another time, but we've run out of time. Thanks very much for joining us. Finally, before we go, I've been speaking to that wonderful violinist